We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
In 1943, director Alfred Hitchcock and star Teresa Wright gave the world a soapy thriller that pushed both the boundaries of camera work as well as that of plot believability.
In 2023, we struck out on wheat, we struck out on rye, and so now we're trying even more rye.
Double it! More rye! The film is Shadow of a Doubt.
The whiskey is 1792 High Rye.
And we'll review them both. This is the Film and Whiskey Podcast.
Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And this week we're looking at 1943's Shadow of a Doubt. This is the midway point of our 5-film Hitchcock retrospective. Brad, how are you feeling about it so far?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I think that it's a weird place to be where Hitchcock is probably considered a top 5 director of all time.
Yeah, I mean, depending on who's making the list, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but in general, I would say a solid 80-90% of people who matter in the world of cinema review would probably put him in a top 5 position.
Oh, sure.
Right, Mount Rushmore at least.
Oh, yeah. He's the 5th one on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
Famously 5 faces containing Mount Rushmore.
Well, no, they actually just like carved him hanging onto the nose like Cary Grant. So here's the weird place I am. I've been like fine with these movies.
Yeah.
Like I didn't care for Notorious. It was okay. I thought that Rope was really well done, but wasn't like crazy compelling. And I mean, you know, this is 3 out of 5. I liked this movie, Bob.
I liked it too.
I don't know if I'd go like overboard for it, but I liked it.
I am much higher on Rope than you are, but even I will acknowledge that like we're into his second tier of films now. And I think I said that in the first week that there's only a few directors that, you know, when you get into their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th best film, they're all still in the IMDb top 250, right? It's like him, Spielberg, Scorsese, you know, it's IMDb, so probably Chris Nolan, you know, but like, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm not surprised to see that like a lot of these movies are at like an 8.1 or an 8.0 on IMDb, because it's like everyone agrees that this is like an 8, but I don't know many people that are arguing that some of these movies are any higher than an 8. And so like that's, you know, folks, we've set the stage for today because we're talking about Shadow of a Doubt, a movie that is really well regarded by critics. I think, you know, for some of the reasons you mentioned, Brad, the camera work is extraordinary. It's Hitchcock first starting to dive into, you know, the seedy underbelly of the American idyllic community in a way that he would go on to do for years and years afterwards. But also, like, I'm not going to put this movie above Vertigo anytime soon.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at. I have liked these movies. They're all really solid, but part of me feels like an impetus to rank them higher than they really are. And I feel like I'm trying to stick to my guns. Say, hey, these are good. They're not great. They're good, solid films. And I think the thing that sticks out to me is that you can tell... I mean, this kind of feels like a Close Encounters of the Third Kind for me, where like you can tell that if Close Encounters of the Third Kind was made by even like a B tier director, like a solid, good director, nobody crazy, it would be a way worse movie. You know what I mean? And I feel that way about these. I think any of these 3 films made by any sort of a lesser director would be like a 5.9 to 6.3 on IMDb, and nobody would ever talk about them.
Yeah, totally agree, man. And I think that's what Hitchcock brings to the table, where even when you're watching his 8th best movie, it's still better than most people's best movie. And I think that's kind of what we have here today. So let's dive into talking about Shadow of a Doubt a little bit. This is a movie that is set in the middle of well, I don't know if it's set then, but it's made in the middle of World War II, right before, I was going to say right before D-Day, but not really. Made in the middle of World War II, and kind of pushing back a little bit on the image of like America as this beautiful, idyllic place. And yet at the same time, it also seems like one of Hitchcock's least cynical movies. I was reading a lot about the production of this movie. Hitchcock's mom had passed away right before he started making this. And if you go back and listen to our Notorious episode, we've talked about mother figures in Hitchcock movies. And a lot of people have
totally don't matter at all. Not a big influence.
Well, I was going to say a lot of people have pointed out that this is probably the most sympathetic and kind of nostalgic mother figure in any of his movies, that, Teresa Wright's mom. And so this was a really personal movie for Hitchcock to make, even if on its face, it's just kind of like your standard thriller of guy brings chaos into an orderly situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this is a really fascinating film, mostly just for the fact that the title of the movie is Shadow of a Doubt. Mm-hmm. And yet, as a viewer, I don't know what viewers were like in 1943. I very well could have thought that maybe Joseph Cotton really was just a kind-hearted little brother. But from the very start, Bob, you know that he's bad news.
Oh, I mean, like I have never more quickly been like, yeah, that guy did it. Whatever they're accusing him of, he did it. From the opening shot of the movie. Listen, this movie opens in a boarding house where this man is laying on the bed, surrounded by strewn about $100 bills.
It's just cash.
He did it. Whatever he's accused of, he did it.
Yep, 100%. And I think that's one of the struggles I had with this film, is that I'm all about technique and camera movement and lighting and how you use sound and sound and the music and the design. All those things are great for a film. But at the end of the day, the plot has to be somewhat believable. And this movie, the suspenseful part of it was whether or not I was ever going to believe anything that was happening on screen. Spoiler alert, I didn't.
All right, well, on that note, I think it's a perfect place for us to transition to our first segment of the day, which we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the podcast where Brad breaks down the plot of the movie that he has just seen, often for the first time.
Bob, why do you explain Brad Explains? Shouldn't it be a Brad Explainception where Brad explains Brad Explains?
That's true. I mean, you could start explaining your own mansplaining to us.
Whoa. We never said mansplaining here, Bob.
You are a man, and you splain.
I might be a man, and I might splain, but I am not a mansplainer, sir.
My favorite thing when you do Brad Explains, I think I've told you this before, is that you always start Brad Explains by saying the name of the movie and then is a film, as if that wasn't a given. Shadow of a Doubt is a film about... oh, thank God you weren't reviewing the stage play.
Lord of the Rings is a book that's really freaking long.
I'm in your head now. I can tell. As soon as you start doing it today, you're going to be like, I can't say that this is a film. I can't do it.
I think it's a leftover from the meme of West Side Story is undoubtedly a movie full of characters and story.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, on that note, let me finish what I was saying. You've often seen the movie for the first time. This is your first time seeing this movie, right?
Yes, I did not have a surprise, I've seen this before moment like last week.
You know what? So one of the podcasts that my wife listens to, at the end of every episode, they fact check themselves. And I've started thinking we should probably start doing that, at least for the
that's a good idea.
The prior week of our podcast, but I'm 2 weeks late on this. I went back and listened to the Notorious episode the other day. And now you weren't trying to state a fact, but you were just kind of ballparking it. We were talking about how Hitchcock was like in the middle of his career when he made Notorious. And you said like, Bob, you had told me that this was like his 12th, 15th movie. I went back and counted up how many movies he had made before Notorious.
37.
Yeah, it was like 36 movies.
Oh my gosh, dude.
So we were off by a little bit there.
just a tiny bit. Just get the intern on it, man.
We really do. We need the film and whiskey intern.
Yeah. We're taking applications. fnwpodcast@gmail.com.
One of the things that you can do as intern is count down the clock as Brad gets into Brad Explains. I have set up 60 seconds here, and you get to spoil this entire movie. So, folks, if you have not seen Shadow of a Doubt and you'd like to watch it before we jump in, this is the time to hit pause. Join us after you've watched the movie because Brad...
we didn't spoil it already by
saying the guy did it repeatedly.
Yeah.
All right, dude. 60 seconds on the clock and go.
Shadow of a Doubt is a film about... Nailed it. Shadow of a Film is a... Shadow of a
Film. I love it.
Shadow of a Doubt is a film about a young woman, played by Teresa Wright, who is utterly bored with her life and dissatisfied with the way her family lives. She wishes and thinks about writing to her uncle, her favorite uncle, Charlie, who she's named after, to come and visit them. Sure enough, he has telegrammed them already before she even knew it, letting her know that he is on his way. And by the way, he's a murderer. He killed a bunch of widows that he thinks are fat and sloppy pigs. So, yeah, he comes. Teresa Wright finds him out. The dad is an amateur sleuth with his buddy who shows up unannounced.
The
go.
end?
Yeah. Oh, fun fact. Teresa Wright murders her uncle.
She sure does. She becomes what she swore she could never be.
Oh, twist. That's the real twist, Bob.
There it is, man.
The murderer she never knew was inside of her.
All right.
Must be genetic.
So Shadow of a Doubt is an interesting movie to talk about, Brad. And I think, from my point of view, if I could use one word to sum up this whole movie, it's like almost. Almost is the word that works best for this movie. It almost pulls off everything it's trying to do. It has this theme that it's trying to say about like repressing our own nature and are we destined to do these things? The link between these people and this family, is this kind of a thing genetic? Is this evil lurking within all of us just beneath the surface of propriety? And I think that it kind of teases some really big ideas and some really interesting paths that it could have gone down, and it never quite goes down any of them. And so it's an interesting movie because it's like a stepping stone movie for Hitchcock. You can see where he ends up going and doing way better. And in this movie, it's just almost there.
You know, it's 100% fully there for me in this film, and I'm here for it.
What's that?
The dad and his friend talking about how we're not talking about murder. We're talking about how we would murder each other.
That's one of the best lines in the whole movie.
I could watch hours of Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life and what's his name? Hume Cronin.
Yeah. Yep.
Just going on and on and on about how they would murder each other. That absolutely made my day.
They are the comic relief of this movie. And I think that if this movie does anything really well, it is to show how this kind of quaint small town life can both be upended by the presence of this murderer and also kind of reflect that murderer at the same time. You know, the dad is talking about murder the entire movie. And because he seems innocuous enough, they kind of brush that aside. But then the guy who is, you know, suave and sophisticated is actually murdering people. It's a really interesting dynamic. And I think they do a really good job at kind of, showing what the quaint American household looks like. If you read the credits of this movie, it says that the playwright Thornton Wilder helped in some ways with the development of the movie, which I thought was really interesting. You know, if you ever read the play Our Town when you were like in high school, Brad, we had to read it one year. There's a lot of parallels here. And he was kind of known as the chronicler of this kind of Americana. And I think that, for being a British person who had lived in America only for a few years at this point, Hitchcock does a really good job at capturing that.
Yeah, and a large part of that comes from the fact that Hitchcock lived in, is it Santa Rosa or Santa Clara?
I don't know. One of them.
Santa something.
I didn't look up his address before we started, unfortunately.
Well, he lived in the town that is, mentioned, and the town that Teresa Wright and her family live in. He lived there, and, his mother had gotten extremely ill back in London, but it was during, the air raids over London during World War II, so he wasn't able to go back and visit. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how the warmness and the kindness of this small Californian town always really, stuck with him and was meaningful to him. And so I think that this film, you said earlier that it's one of his more sincere films compared to some of the cynical looks of other ones. Mm-hmm. I think that stands out in his filmography because, like, I'm going to say Santa Rosa. The Santa Rosa that he presents here is just so charming and nice. And they're just like, yeah, here's this random big city guy coming in from the East Coast. And we like him so much, never having met him, that we're going to give him the reins to give a whole lecture at our country club. Mm-hmm. like they're just so kind and welcoming, and they're not punished for believing in the bad guy. Mm. And I think that is the least cynical take that Hitchcock could ever take in a movie.
And yet at the same time, though, because he has such cynical takes throughout his career, I kept wondering, are you trying to portray these people in a really sincere way? Or is this your most cynical joke ever? Do you know what I mean? I couldn't tell if it was so over the top sincere that it was tipping back into cynicism again. And, I keep thinking of this movie from almost a decade later called Night of the Hunter. Really great movie. And it's kind of similar. It's about a serial killer who weds these kids' mom. And, they figure out that he is a murderer, and then he ends up chasing them cross country. It's it's a crazy movie. It's really, really good. But the way that the director, Charles Laughton, shot that movie is almost it leans even more into the surreal. It's so Americana that it looks almost dreamlike. It doesn't look like a real place. And I feel like this movie kind of teeters on the edge of that. It can't tell if it wants to be, Boone City from Best Years of Our Lives and be a really close to reality representation of America, or if it's more like Bedford Falls in It's a Wonderful Life. And it's, it's what we remember America being, even if it's not what it really is.
It's hard because all of the characters in this movie are so over the top and so ridiculous in their portrayal that it's hard for me to tell if he is being sincere or insincere in their portrayal. If it's a Bedford Falls or a Boone City, or I really don't know. I think that this is a movie that it probably tells you a lot about yourself when you watch it. Because for me, I tried to watch it and just be like, this is all ridiculous. I'm just going to believe in the world that we're in and have a good time with it, even if it feels very unplausible. The amount of hoops that they have to jump through to believe that these detectives, federal agents are following a guy that they don't have a picture of. They have no idea what he looks like. And yet we just showed up at this house and we think that we're just going to take pictures of your house and you're going to believe us. And it's pretty ridiculous, man.
Yeah. So to give a little bit more backstory on what actually happens in the movie. So Joseph Cotton escapes from these two policemen who are chasing him at the beginning of the movie. So that he's wanted for something and probably guilty of it. He arrives in this idyllic town and just shacks up with his sister's family. And very, openly just tells everyone, I'm never leaving. I'm staying here forever. In a very pompous way. But yeah, about midway through the movie, these two detectives show up. And they explain to Teresa Wright what they're doing there, and that they suspect her uncle of being a serial killer. And it's interesting because, to your point, Brad, like, they don't have a picture of him. They don't have any hard evidence linking him to it. And to be frank, I don't even remember exactly how they explained that they tracked him there or like what their suspicion is. Like, if they don't know what he looks like or what he's been doing, I don't even know how he came up on their radar. Did you pick up on that at all?
No, not at all. There is no evidence linking the man living in the, what's their name? The Newtons, in the Newton household to the serial killer completely on the opposite side of the country.
You know what, though? It's that old-fashioned detective thing where it's just a hunch. I got a good hunch on this one.
I got a good hunch on this one, see?
Oh, man. Yeah, so, okay, let's talk performances a little bit, because we've already pointed out the implausibility of some of this plot. The two main characters here are Joseph Cotton as serial killer and Teresa Wright as innocent girl. And those
they never actually prove that he's a serial killer. All right, that's all I'm saying.
They don't prove it, but he straight up confesses it. Like, okay,
it's under duress, Bob. It's not legally binding.
Why don't we start with Teresa Wright? Because we've already talked about her recently with The Best Years of Our Lives. And at that time, I said, I like Teresa Wright a lot, but she seemed to get pigeonholed playing like a 15-year-old, even when she was almost 30. And that's kind of what she's doing here. I don't know if they even say what her actual age is in this movie, but as I was reading the synopsis of this film, it specifically called her a teenager. So I think she's like 23, 24 at the time this movie gets made. So she's playing slightly younger than what she really is. It just gets to a point where it's hard to buy for me because she doesn't look like a teenager. She has a very youthful face, but it's very obvious that she's like a woman. She is a grown woman playing a little girl in both of these movies.
I took it as she was a little bit older. I was thinking she was portraying like a 19 to 21-year-old because when they're in the bar and her school friend comes up and says, oh, we were in school together a few years back.
That's true.
And now I've got this job as a waitress and I, can't hold a job. And it seemed like, like we graduated a few years ago. And this girl...
Bold of you to assume that girl graduated.
That's true, man.
I'm pretty sure she was 15. She just, she had to go to work,
her
man.
Her plot line, her plot line felt a lot like the mother who has cancer in the room. Like, she just comes on screen and is like, I can't hold down a job, and I'm being used, and my life is terrible. And Teresa Wright and Joseph Cotton are like, oh, wow, cool.
Please go away. Yeah.
Anyways, back to our story about murder.
We're trying to confront each other here.
So I think that in my mind, in my world that I've created about Shadow of a Doubt, I think she's like 20, 21 years old.
Okay, fair.
Here's the thing. I love me some Teresa Wright. I think she's incredible. I think Joseph Cotton's incredible in this. Our second Joseph Cotton movie, is that correct?
Yes, after Citizen Kane.
Yeah, Jedediah. Which is an incredible name. We need to bring the name Jedediah back.
Jed. We need some Jeds.
We do.
So Joseph Cotton, well, you're right. Let's not get off Teresa Wright yet. Go ahead and finish your thought on how beautiful and wonderful she is.
Oh, she's incredible. I think I'm in like movie star love with Teresa Wright. Mm-hmm. Here's the thing. This is, as I said, the more sincere of a Hitchcockian film. However, what's up with Charlie and Charlie trying to get it on the entire movie?
Yeah, there's some weird incest stuff going on in this movie.
Super duper weird vibes going on between the two of them.
And it's one thing for a young girl to have a crush on somebody, right? Like if she was 12, this would make more sense. Where she has a crush on her uncle. And that's not going anywhere and that she's not thinking it through because she's 12. This is a full-grown woman. And she's like telling her uncle, we're not like regular uncle and niece. And it's like, wait a minute. I'm sorry, what? What's going on?
What kind of uncle and niece are you then?
Also,
Please.
I'm not saying I wouldn't watch that movie. I'm just saying I'm surprised to see it here.
I don't know if that would have gotten by the censors.
Probably not.
1943.
Probably not.
But if I'm being honest, I don't know how this got by the censors. It is super awkward. Like, The writers of Leviticus, I do not think would have been comfortable with this.
They would have been stoned in the street, man.
they would have, man.
Oh, that's funny. All right, so I don't really know what else to say about Teresa Wright at this point. She's good in this movie. I don't know that I would say she's better than she was in Best Years of Our Lives. I really preferred her character there. She also had a lot more to work with dramatically there, whereas this one, she's just kind of a young, innocent girl who is terrified for part of the movie. And she's good, but, there's just not as much to do.
I'll disagree with you a little bit there. I think she's the best performance in this movie. I think Joseph Cotten is great. I think that Teresa Wright has enough moments of vacillating between love for her family and love for her uncle, which gets weird. But the descent into terror, I think, is really well done. And I think she just plays afraid really, really well. And so I think for me, I really like Teresa in this.
On the other hand, you have Joseph Cotten, who, like we said, is our second Joseph Cotten movie. We have not gotten around to watching the movie The Third Man, which is widely considered one of the, 20, 25 best movies ever made. We will get to that movie at some point, but that is the other film that Joseph Cotten is really remembered for. And Brad, I sent you a quote earlier that I found from Joseph Cotten where he talked about how, Orson Welles said his favorite movie of his is Citizen Kane. Hitchcock said his favorite is Shadow of a Doubt. And Carol Reed said The Third Man. And I'm in all three. And I'm like, what a badass,
Right.
No, I think he's
just going to mention I was in all three.
I think he's really good here, man. And if the script doesn't do him any favors in terms of the subtlety department, that's not really his fault. He's really good at being menacing and charming in equal measure. And you really do get the sense that Teresa Wright is trapped in this house and in this situation with the guy. And I think he does a great job of leveraging that sort of power disimbalance.
I wish that had gone on longer. I think this movie is perfectly timed, hour and 45 minutes. It's a good length of film, but I wish a little more of the runtime had been devoted to the kind of the cat and mouse game between Charlie and Charlie. That there was just something about that portion of the film that I was fully engaged in. And I think it's partially because kind of the sappiness falls away and it's just a thriller between two, your protagonist and antagonist. And I really enjoyed that part of the film a lot.
I did too. And it really seemed to get there towards the end of the movie. Like the last 25 minutes, they're trying to outsmart each other and kind of devise ways for the other person to either get killed or to get caught trying to kill her. And so she's putting herself in harm's way. She's trying to trick him. He's trying to catch her. Brad, this is my second time seeing this movie. And I remembered the scene with the broken step outside the house. And for some reason in my mind, I remember that coming back again. Like she tricked him into running down that step. It never comes back again. And I think that's why I keep going to the almost thing. There's some really clever setups for a Chekhov's gun situation, for something to come back around and pay off at the end. And, the way this movie ends isn't anticlimactic, but it's also oh, okay, we're just going to have him fall off a train. I thought that was going to be a little bit more clever than that.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what is ultimately unsatisfying about this movie.
Teresa Wright should have grabbed his wrist and gripped so hard that he loses his grip, and then she reaches up and strangles him. That would have been the best way to end the film, in my humble opinion.
To truly become the killer inside.
Yeah, the ending felt a little anticlimactic, but it fit the rest of the film. As unbelievable as so many of the plot elements of this movie were, the fact that she just is able to, kind of reverse the grip that he has on her and casually push him out. It's yeah, sure, why not? Sure, you do you, Hitchcock. I'm just here for the ride.
All right, man, I think this is a good place to hit pause. We're both just here for the ride today, and we're going to see where this ride takes us as we revisit 1792. What do you say?
Do I have to? I've not been enjoying 1792 so far. And the thing is, I feel bad because they're not even like bad whiskeys, but I feel like we've been on a run of like 35 and up for a while now. So to hit a few in a row that aren't that feels strange, Bob.
All right, well, let's get to it, Brad.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
All right, today we are trying 1792 High Rye. This is a special release from 1792, and it's interesting because they market the regular 1792 as a High Rye bourbon. So this should have been called Higher Rye, I think.
Highest Rye, their third release.
Oh man, yeah. So once again, this is
a cannabis-infused rye. Highest Rye.
Once again, this is an undisclosed mash bill, so we have no idea exactly how much rye is in it. But trust us, bro, it's High Rye.
So much rye.
It's once again coming in at 94.3 proof. At one time, this did carry an 8-year age statement. It is currently not an 8-year age stated whiskey, so we don't know exactly what the ages are in this blend. I think, Brad, if there's one frustrating thing about this, it's that I don't have any info to go on here. And, typically we don't care, like as long as the whiskey's good, like whatever. But it's nice to be able to at least tell people what the percentages are when you're going to call it High Rye.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have some friends who are like super deep into the whiskey world and they want to know all that information about everything they drink. That's great for them. I'm glad for them. I enjoy that because I'm on a podcast where we're trying to inform people. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why we want to know the information. But overall, experiencing things blind is sometimes a lot more fun. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's okay with me personally when there's not a ton of information out there. It makes it more fun to kind of guess and think about it when I drink it. But as a consumer who is trying to inform the public, give us more information.
I'm really excited to dive back into the rye side of things after last week's sweet wheat. Brad, I was thinking we actually have had at least one 1792 product on the show before this run. Way back in season 1 or 2, we had a flight of whiskeys sent to us by Bourbon Charity, and it was a flight of all bottled and bond stuff. And the one that you and I liked the best was 1792 bottled and bond. And we got notes of banana on that thing. I want to recapture the magic of what we had way back then. And if anything's going to do it, I guess it's going back to the original mash bill or some variation on it. So let's dive into
the Higher Rye version.
Let's dive into Higher Rye and tell me what you're picking up on the nose, Brad.
Last week we talked about this. I got a little bit of acetone last week that just lingered. It's still here a tiny bit this week, but it's overpowered nicely by some cinnamon. Mm-hmm. And then all I could think of as I nosed this was the sour caramel apple pops that we had as a kid. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. It's caramely, but it's not caramel and
but it's
green
also
apple.
apple pop.
It is caramel apple pop.
Yeah. No, I like that. I do get a little bit of cinnamon and apples on this. This smells like a bourbon. I would say that the last 2 weeks they haven't really smelled in the classic bourbon realm. This is definitely a more classical bourbon nose. One thing I will say is that I wouldn't necessarily say that the ethanol is really strong on this one, but the nose reminds me of some random bourbon that I've had recently that is a barrel proof bourbon. It smells barrel proof, and I don't know how else to explain it. It's not as if the ethanol is singeing my nostrils here, but I'm surprised to see that it's only 93 proof again.
Yeah, it definitely has a little kick to it.
There's a lot going on. I like this a lot. I'm going to give it a 7.5 on the nose.
Yeah, I'm just below you. I'm at a 7 out of 10 on the nose. as I got into the actual palate here, I felt like I ran into some similar issues from the last few weeks. I get some rye spice here. It definitely, for what we said at the start, it's definitely a higher rye content. There's vanilla. The caramel kind of disappears for me, and it turns into just kind of like a sour apple peel, which isn't too bad, but the flavor just kind of doesn't pack the punch I'm hoping for. I'm at a 6 out of 10 on the palate.
This one is really interesting because there's a lot of sweetness underlying the really charry, toasty oak notes. But the sweetness is kind of like simple syrup. Like it's just sugar and water. I don't get a ton of complexity or like honey or anything like that. And then again, last week, I think I got a lot of leather on it. I think this week it's not quite so much leather. There's some tobacco, but it's just heavily toasted oak. We've talked a lot about the difference between char and toasted oak. And I think with toasted oak, it's a little bit more, I don't know, bitter, sour than you get with like a really heavy char. And I'm getting that here. The oak really overtakes things for me, coupled with a pretty, I don't know if the words bland sweetness makes sense, but that's kind of what I'm going with here. I'm just going to give this a 6.5 on the palate.
Yeah, no joke. On the finish, I wrote the words generically sweet. Like the finish is kind of thin. It's a little bit short. It's generically sweet. I didn't get a lot of the spiciness that often comes on a higher rye finish. It's not bad. There's just, once again, not enough character here for me to really be wowed. I was at a 5.5 on the finish.
I mean, I'm going to beat a 6.5 again. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. There's nothing to write home about either. I will say this, and it's going to sound way more harsh than I mean it, but like when I try to get people into whiskey and they tell me about the things in whiskey they don't like some of the flavors they don't like or how harsh it can be or whatever, I actually think this is what they're describing. Do you know what I mean? And that's not to say, well, listen.
Very harsh sounding, Bob.
It does sound very harsh, but like, I don't think this is a flawed whiskey. I don't think there's like something wrong with the distillate here. No. I also think that like, if you were to put this in front of someone as their very first whiskey, it's challenging to get through. Like it really is. You have to be willing to, Brad, we've tried like 500, 600 whiskeys on this show now. And even now, this is not my preferred flavor wheelhouse for bourbon. There's too much toasted oak. There's too much tobacco. It's really like, it's a more bitter tasting bourbon. And I think that that's kind of like, I guess what I'm trying to say is this is the opposite of a gateway into whiskey. I think for most people, it's still not bad, but if you're not a fan of bourbon, I don't know that this would even appeal to you.
Yeah. And so, we'll just kind of sprint through. Balance, I gave a 6 out of 10. Where are you at, Bob?
I'll do 6.5 again.
Yeah. Value is the hard part. So, like, I saw that in the state of Ohio, this is $40, but it's not really sold in the state of Ohio anymore. And I don't know, is it still a special release, Bob? Like, what?
It is a special release. It's only released once a year in limited quantities. And, we always pull some of our stats from the website Breaking Bourbon. We've given them a lot of publicity here because they do great work. But even on their website, they said, hey, if there is a silver lining to this whiskey, it's that it's a special release bourbon that is priced significantly lower than special releases from other companies. And I do think we have to give them a little bit of credit there. Like $36 MSRP, you're probably getting this for like $50 if you find it anywhere. I don't think that's a bad price for a special release. I don't like this whiskey, Brad. And I know that that's how you kind of evaluate value. But if I'm just looking at it strictly from a market perspective, I don't think it's a bad value. I'll give it, once again, a 6.5.
Yeah, I think for a limited edition, $36, I'll give it a 5.5 out of 10. I think that's a decent value. It's not great, mostly because the juice just isn't the best.
All right, Brad, so that's bringing me to a 33.5 out of 50. What are you coming to?
Right kind of dead on 30 out of 50.
All right, that's the same as you were last week with the sweet wheat. So, I hate to make you pick between two things you really don't care for, but which of the two did you prefer?
I I think the sweet wheat.
Me too.
Yeah, I think it just had a little, it represented a wheated bourbon much better than this represents a high rye bourbon.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to this one, man, because I thought the nose had so much promise compared to the last two.
I totally agree.
But it's definitely our lowest rated one at a 31.75 out of 50 or a 63.5 out of 100. I'm not going to recommend this trying or buying. I don't think it's really up to snuff, man.
No, I'm with you. 1792 has not impressed for me so far.
Man, I'm really excited to try the foolproof when we get to that one in our last week. Both because I want to see if these samples that we were sent have something off on them. And because it gives me a chance to bust open my actual bottle that I have of foolproof on the shelf and kind of compare and contrast. Because I remember loving the foolproof. But I'm kind of with you, man. These three have been more of a letdown than I was anticipating.
Yeah. Well, speaking of more of a letdown than you were anticipating, let's get into our next section, Bob.
All right, Brad, let's get to it.
All right, everybody. That was 1792, the highest rye, a whiskey that probably had a lot of rye in it.
Probably. Who's to say?
Who's to say?
I have a shadow of a doubt about that, Brad.
It has a lot of it has a lot of Canadians in it.
Is it Canada?
Canada's favorite segment, 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob. 2 are right and 1 is wrong. 2 facts and a falsehood.
Wait, was that really your segue? What has a lot of Canadians in? 2 Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the podcast where Brad presents 3 items to me as fact about the making of this movie, one of which is a complete lie and fabrication, and I have to figure out which one that is.
Bob, how you been doing the last 2 weeks?
I just want to win one. I'm not asking for a clean sweep at the end of this season. I'm so upset about last week still, Brad. I feel like you purposely tripped me up.
I was just helping you work through the logic of your statements, Bob.
I'm very upset.
But I promise this week I will not say a single word. I'll just read the facts to you and let you come to your own conclusion unimpeded by my influence.
It's really more crushing when it happens with a movie that I love as much as Rope, because I thought that I had it pegged, and I did have it pegged. This time around, I'm like, I don't really know a lot about this movie. It's a pretty good movie, but like, I am not optimistic.
Mm-mm. Yeah, you shouldn't be. You're not good at this.
All right, man. Hit me with your 2 facts and a falsehood.
Fact number 1, Charlie's sister mentions that he had had an accident on a bicycle when he was a boy. Earl Nelson, the serial killer on whom this story is loosely based, suffered from an extremely serious mental illness, which was attributed to a near-fatal bicycle accident in his childhood. Fact number 2, Joseph Cotton and Teresa Wright's characters had about a 20-year age gap in the movie, but in real life they were only 7 years apart, with Cotton being born in 1911 and Wright in 1918. Fact number 3, while saying her prayers, little Anne asks for Captain Midnight to be blessed. Captain Midnight was the main character on a popular radio serial in the late 1930s and 40s that followed Captain Midnight as he fought spies and saboteurs for the American government.
I have heard of Captain Midnight before. There's actually a YouTube account called Captain Midnight, and they use like the clip from the old newsreels featuring him, like the short film.
Oh, that's funny.
And like all his videos start with Captain Midnight. So,
dude,
so like
announcers in the 30s, they just knew what was what.
Oh, 100%. Like, I really bothers me that we don't talk like that anymore.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that like radio DJs have been the exact same since like the late 80s.
Right.
Like, you could play the clip from Parks and Rec of the Ira and the Douche.
Oh, 100%.
And like, it just fits every single shock jock in America for the last 40 years.
Okay, you're throwing me off. You said you weren't going to talk any.
I'm sorry.
Okay. The serial killer one, I know that this was based on a serial killer. I have no idea whom or to what extent he rode a bike. I have no freaking idea.
You're not up on your serial killer history?
on my Pee Wee Herman bike riding serial killers. Number 2 sounds plausible, but I have learned to question that. Number 3 was which one? What was number 3?
Captain Midnight.
Oh, Captain Midnight. I'm going to say Captain Midnight's true, just because.
Okay.
How old was Joseph Cotten and Teresa Wright? So I think I said she's probably like 27, I think, in Best Years of Our Lives, which would put her at like 24 here, which means 1918 sounds plausible. But when was Joseph Cotten born? Was he 1911? He makes Citizen Kane in 41. It seems like he would be about 30 there. I don't freaking know, man. I'm going to say number 2 is the Falsehood, because you've been trying to get me on these little technicalities lately. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say Joseph Cotten must be older than I think he is. And number 2 is the Falsehood.
Locked in?
I'm going to lock it in, man.
You're locking it in.
I'm locking it
sure?
in. Yeah.
You're positive.
Come on. Tell me.
Bob, you have officially reached 500.
Yeah!
Oh, man. Yeah. So Cotton was born in 1907, I believe.
Oh,
no,
wow.
1905.
1905. He was 36 years old when he made Citizen Kane. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I never would have guessed, because, like, Wells was only 24 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of always thought they were contemporaries.
Yeah, no, he was a little bit older.
Wow. Huh.
But just older enough to be a sexy uncle.
Isn't that the dream, Brad?
Yeah. Might be somebody's dream.
What we're all shooting for here.
It's 2023, man.
Yeah, don't kink shame, I guess, is the theme of this movie.
Shadow of a doubt. Hashtag no kink shaming.
All right, man, what do you want to talk about with the rest of this movie? Because I feel like we did a good job talking about Hitchcock infusing this with a kind of sincerity that he doesn't typically do. I guess we could talk a little bit about the camera work. That's something that you mentioned.
I was about to say.
I was going to say, you mentioned it multiple times in the early going of the episode. And I think that the camera, like the composition of the shots is really beautiful in this movie. Yeah. I don't know that I think it's as inventive of a camera as Rope, which I really loved. But there are some shots in this movie. I sent you a screenshot of one right after Joseph Cotten realizes not only has she figured out who he is, but that she is going to obstinately stand in his way until he does something about it. And he's walking up the steps of the house and he turns around and then there's a point of view shot from him looking down the steps to the front door where Teresa Wright is standing. And the shot that they compose of her shadow being cast all the way into the house, it made me pause the movie and just make a mental note of, I have to send Brad a screenshot of this because it's such a great shot.
Oh, it's incredible, dude. And even just like the storytelling aspect of like the doorway represents a path to freedom. They light the shot so beautifully because everything inside the house is completely dark. Mm-hmm. And then it's this bright light and then her, like this angel standing in his way, keep barring him from paradise. Mm-hmm. Like oh, dude, what an incredible shot. I think that throughout the film, he does a really great job of keeping the camera at the right height for all of the shots. And I'm with you that the movement of the camera might not be the best that he's ever done, but I think that the still camera shots that he has, he just always has them at the exact right height. Like when the train's coming in, it's a famous shot, the train's coming into town, it's billowing out this like black smoke. It's rolling coal real hard, Bob.
I was like, you know what? I know we pollute a lot these days, but it literally like obscured the entire sky for miles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. and like also like let's think how many takes do you think it took to get that shot?
Right.
Like at least 10, right? So there's a lot of pollutants in the air. It's no big deal. Here's the thing though. The way he keeps the camera just a little bit closer to ground level than it would normally be pushes the train and the smoke into this menacing, like larger than life figure. And it's shots like that throughout the film where the camera always is presenting its subjects in either the most menacing or the most innocent of lights. That I was like, man, Hitchcock, he just knows what he's doing.
I was reading a thing about some of the shots in this movie, and they mentioned that the scene where the mom brings him breakfast in bed, that the way they designed the headboard and his shadow cast upon it is meant to look like dark wings, like he's the angel of death coming. And I didn't really notice it when I watched the movie, but I didn't see it. I didn't read that until after I had seen the movie. So you're absolutely right. Like there's a ton of iconography and symbolism in the way this movie is shot. I do think that, once again, Hitchcock had such a fantastic eye for what he wanted to put on screen. I was reading today an interview that he gave where he talked about how he had basically the whole movie storyboarded with every movie that he did before he started filming. And the interviewer said, like, if you're going to pre-visualize the whole movie, like, what fun is it in directing? And he was like, it's not. I hate it. I wish someone else could do it. Like, all the creativity's gone by the time I get behind the camera. And then the person says, well, then why don't you have someone else shoot the movie? And he said, well, they might screw it up. And I'm like, good for you, Hitchcock. A true workman.
That quote should be like the definition for auteur theory.
100%, man. Brad, I think I'm in a good spot talking about this movie for us to get into our final segment of the day, which we call Let's Make It a Double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's the final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
You're gonna hate my Let's Make It a Double.
Let's Make It a Double is the part of the podcast where we pick a second movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. I'm going to go really quickly here because I've already mentioned mine. I think Night of the Hunter is a really great movie to pair up with this one. They're both about Americana and introducing the angel of death into the equation and what that might do. I think if you wanted to go modern with it, you could probably pair it with something like No Country for Old Men, which kind of does the same function, or as Brad would call it, No Country for Old Men. I think that those would both be really good, but Night of the Hunter is a movie I've never mentioned on this show before, so check that one out.
Yeah, don't check that out. You should go watch So I Married an Axe Murderer.
Hey, there you go. Oh, that's actually a great one.
It's such a great campy film, man. And as I was thinking about other whodunit murderer films, I immediately was like, I remembered I was in college and the church that I worked for was like 45, 50 minutes away. And so a lot of times on Saturday night, I would just head up, hang out with my pastor, we'd play some Madden, and then I'd just spend the night in his basement. Well, one day, his wife was like, oh, you like movies? We need to watch this great film that I loved when I was younger. So I Married an Axe Murderer. And I watched it with my pastor and his wife. And even as like a 19, 20-year-old, I was like, this is not a great movie, but I really love it.
I feel like you could say that about a lot of like the early 90s comedies. Like not a great movie, but I'm here for it.
Yeah. I mean, you have Mike Myers playing his fat Scottish dad singing Rod, what's his face?
Rod Stewart?
If you think I'm sexy. It's incredible.
All right, so I guess you can pair this movie up with that. That makes a perfectly logical double feature. Brad, let's get into final scores here. I want to be like the movie critic who sees what they all see in this movie and mark it as an important movie at the very least. And I understand the significance of this movie to Hitchcock's career. It just doesn't quite work for me. It's really close to working, but at the end of the day, it's like a fun 3-star diversion. Whereas I feel like something like Rope is a 4-star diversion. You know what I mean? And so for me, I'm just going to give this a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm in a similar place. I really enjoyed the film, and I think that's what kept me in it. is that all the silliness didn't detract from the movie for me. I kind of enjoyed it. We didn't even talk about it, but like the detectives that come, she just randomly falls in love with one of the detectives based on zero amount of chemistry or romance or anything. Stuff like that. It just was silly and fun. I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Ooh,
I think it's a fun movie. I think that because of Hitchcock's direction, it definitely its reach exceeds its grasp. I'll just say that.
All right, well, there you have it. Brad gives it an 8. I give it a 7.5, taking us to an average of 7.75 out of 10. But we would like to know what you think. Have you seen Shadow of a Doubt? You can let us know what we're missing, if we're missing anything, at any of our social media accounts. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at Film Whiskey.
Or you can jump onto the Discord. We are on there every single day talking about weird uncle-niece relationships. So if you want to join the conversation, you can find a link to our Discord at the end of every single one of our show notes.
Next week, we are watching a movie that I'm pretty excited to watch, actually, Brad. It's one I just saw for the first time about a year ago. It's from Hitchcock pre-America. So it's when he's still making movies in Britain. This is 1935's spy thriller, The 39 Steps. So join us for that one next week. Until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.